The Apache woman hid in the rancher's closet until he discovered her. The sun was just beginning to sink behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. On the edge of a quiet prairie, a lone ranch stretched across the land. It was a place of hard work and silence, where the wind whispered through the tall grasses and the cattle grazed lazily under the fading light. The rancher, a man in his 40s, lived alone. His face was weathered from years under the sun, and his hands were calloused from endless days of labor. Life had not been easy for him. Years ago, he had lost his family to sickness, leaving him with nothing but his land and the memories of happier times. The rancher had grown used to the solitude. The work kept him busy, but nights were the hardest. In the stillness, he could hear the quiet of the world around him, the creak of the wooden floors, the rustle of the trees outside, and sometimes the distant howl of a coyote. Yet even in this loneliness he found a strange comfort. He knew every inch of his land, every tree, every fence, and every barn. Life here was predictable, safe, and under his control, or so he thought, but the land was not empty. Beyond the hills, where the forests grew thick and the rivers ran swift, lived the Apache people. There were stories among settlers of the conflicts between the towns and the tribes. Tales of raids, misunderstandings, and loss spread like wildfire. Fear often colored the rancher's thoughts. He did not know much about the Apache personally, only the stories told by men who had never stepped foot in the forests. And yet sometimes, in the quiet of the night, he wondered about the lives hidden beyond the horizon, lives as real as his own. One evening, as the rancher moved through the main house, he noticed something strange. A shadow flickered across the wall. At first, he thought it was just the wind playing tricks on the candlelight. The rancher had always been cautious, but he had never been a fearful man. Still, a small knot of unease settled in his chest. He walked through the house slowly, listening. The floors creaked under his boots, but there was no sound beyond that. Perhaps it was his imagination, he thought, or perhaps it was just an animal that had wandered in. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, pulling at the edges of his mind. Days passed and the rancher tried to ignore the feeling. He focused on his work, feeding the cattle, mending fences, checking the water troughs. But each evening the shadow returned. It was never the same shape twice, but always fleeting, always gone before he could truly understand it. The rancher began to feel a strange mixture of curiosity and unease. Something was not right, yet he could not pinpoint what it was. It was a mystery that gnawed at him quietly, like the wind that slowly erodes the rocks. One particularly quiet night, after a long day of riding through the pasture, the rancher returned home to find a cold draft near the kitchen. The windows were shut and the doors were locked. The draft seemed to come from nowhere, as if it had no source at all. He frowned, rubbing his hands together to keep warm. He knew the house well, every nook and cranny, yet something felt different. The air carried a scent he could not identify, a mixture of earth, smoke, and something unfamiliar. His instincts, honed by years of solitude and hard work, told him that he was not alone. Despite the growing tension, the rancher tried to focus on the practical. He checked the windows and doors again, walking through each room with care. The floorboards creaked under his boots, and for a moment he thought he heard a faint whisper, but the wind outside was strong, and it could have been nothing. He shook his head, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He had faced storms, wild animals, and the harsh winters of the prairie. He could face this, whatever it was. Still, he could not shake the feeling that something was waiting in the shadows. The nights that followed were similar. The rancher would work until dusk, and then retreat to the warmth of his home. He would light a fire, eat his simple meal, and try to push away the thoughts of the unknown. But each time he closed his eyes, he felt it, the sense of being watched, of something hiding just beyond the edge of his sight. He became more alert, more cautious. The loneliness of his life suddenly seemed heavier, filled with the possibility that something or someone had entered it without his knowledge. One night, the wind howled louder than usual, rattling the windows and shaking the walls of the house. The rancher was in the kitchen preparing a small supper when he heard it again, a soft sound, almost like a whisper coming from the bedroom upstairs. His heart beat faster, but he did not panic. He grabbed a lantern and moved toward the sound, stepping lightly to avoid making noise. The house was old, and every creak of the floor made him tense, but he pressed on, determined to find the source. What he would find, he could not yet imagine. As he approached the bedroom, he noticed something strange about the closet door. It was slightly ajar, though he was certain he had closed it. The rancher's pulse quickened. He could see nothing inside, only shadows dancing on the walls in the flickering light of the lantern. He called out softly, "Is someone there?" No answer came, only the creaking of the house settling. He took a deep breath, his instincts telling him both to retreat and to investigate further. He reached out, pushing the door gently, and froze. Inside the closet, huddled against the back wall, was a figure. A woman, small and fragile, with wide eyes full of fear. Her hair was dark and tangled, her clothes torn and dirty, and she looked as if she had been running for a long time. The rancher's first instinct was caution. He had been taught to fear strangers to protect himself and his home. But as he looked at her, something else rose within him, a strange, immediate understanding of her suffering. She was not a threat. She was a person in need, hiding from dangers he could not fully see. For a long moment they stared at each other. Neither moved. The woman's eyes were wary, filled with the pain of loss and fear of discovery. The rancher's hands shook slightly, not from fear but from the weight of the moment. Finally, he spoke softly, "Are you hurt? Do you need water?" She nodded slightly, too frightened to speak. He moved carefully, reaching for a small cup and filling it with water. He placed it near her hand and she drank slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. It was the first act of trust, fragile and tentative. The rancher realized that this encounter would change his life forever. He did not yet know her story, nor did he know the danger that still lurked outside. But in that moment he made a silent promise. He would not turn her away. She had come into his life in the quiet of the prairie, in the safety of his home, and he could not ignore her. The nights ahead would be filled with uncertainty, and the days would bring questions he had never asked before. Yet despite the fear and the risk, he felt something he had not felt in years: hope. The prairie outside was dark and still, the wind carrying whispers through the tall grass. Inside, the rancher and the woman shared a quiet space, two lives intersecting by chance, yet bound by circumstance. He could not know what tomorrow would bring, only that he could offer her safety, if only for tonight. And in that fragile moment, as the fire flickered and the shadows danced on the walls, something remarkable began to grow. The beginning of trust, the spark of understanding, and the first steps toward a story neither of them could have imagined. The morning sun filtered softly through the windows, casting warm light across the rancher's small home. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, golden under the early rays. The rancher moved quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile presence in his house. The woman from the closet had stayed through the night, wrapped in a thin blanket he had found in the barn. She had not slept much, but the fact that she was alive and safe for the moment was enough to give him a cautious relief. He brought her a small breakfast of bread and water, setting it carefully near her hands. She looked at the food with wide eyes, hesitant at first, but hunger overcame fear. As she ate, she kept her gaze down, clearly uncertain of what to expect. The rancher sat a few feet away, watching quietly, careful not to make sudden movements. He understood that trust could not be forced. It had to be earned slowly, step by step. After a while, she spoke in a soft, trembling voice, though her words were broken and halting. He did not understand most of them, but he could tell she was trying to communicate something important. Her hands shook as she pointed to the window, then at herself, then at the hills beyond. He realized that she was speaking about danger outside, about people who might be looking for her. His heart tightened. He had heard stories of soldiers searching for native people after conflicts, of children and women being taken or hurt. The thought made him uneasy, but also resolute. He could not and would not let harm come to her under his roof. The rancher began to make small adjustments in the house. He moved furniture to create a safe corner for her to rest, checked every door and window, and even kept the animals inside closer than usual. He spoke little, using gestures and simple words, but his actions carried a silent message. She was safe here. Over the next few days, the woman began to relax slightly. She still flinched at sudden noises and kept her eyes alert for danger, but she no longer shrank from the rancher's presence. Each small gesture of kindness, a warm blanket, a bowl of soup, a quiet word, helped her feel less afraid. One evening, as the rancher mended a broken fence outside, he noticed her watching him from the barn door. Her eyes followed each motion, curious but cautious. She had begun exploring the ranch quietly, learning its boundaries, its smells, and the rhythm of its life. It was clear that she had been living in hiding for a long time. The world outside had taught her to be careful, to trust no one. But here in this lonely ranch she had found a rare safety. The rancher, for his part, was learning something too. He had grown up believing the stories of fear and danger about the Apache people, but seeing her here, vulnerable yet strong, he began to question what he had been told. People were often more than the tales said they were. One night, a storm rolled in over the prairie. The wind howled, bending the trees and rattling the windows. Rain beat against the roof like a drum, and lightning flashed across the sky. The woman was frightened, trembling beside the fireplace. The rancher moved closer, offering a reassuring presence without forcing her to speak or move. He could see how lonely and exposed she must have felt in the forests, always moving, never safe, never certain. Here, at least for one night, she could rest without fear of being discovered. As the storm raged outside, the woman slowly began to share more with him. Through gestures, drawings in the dirt near the fireplace, and broken words, she told him fragments of her story. She had been separated from her family during a violent attack, chased by soldiers who sought to control or punish her people. She had run as far and as fast as she could, seeking safety wherever it could be found. She did not know if anyone she loved had survived, and the thought weighed heavily on her small shoulders. The rancher listened silently, understanding her pain even if he could not fully comprehend every detail. Her story, told in whispers and gestures, painted a picture of resilience and courage, and he felt a deep respect for her strength. Days turned into weeks, and life at the ranch settled into a quiet rhythm. The woman helped with small chores, fetching water from the well, gathering firewood, and feeding the animals. She still kept a wary distance, but the trust between them grew in subtle ways. A shared glance, a nod, the simple understanding that neither would harm the other. The rancher noticed the little things, the way she flinched at sudden noises, the careful way she stepped through the house, the intensity in her eyes when she looked toward the hills. He began to understand her world, the dangers she had faced, and the courage it took simply to survive. He also realized that he had begun to care for her more than he expected. He admired her resilience, her quiet strength, and her ability to face hardship without losing hope. For the first time in years, he felt a connection to someone that went beyond the simple bonds of work or necessity. He could not speak of this feeling, not fully, but it was there, growing quietly, like a seed waiting for spring. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and gold, the woman and the rancher sat outside near the barn. The prairie was calm, the storm from days before having passed. She pointed toward the horizon, then toward herself, then back at him. He understood that she was trying to ask questions about his life, about this place, about the world she had never known. He began to answer in simple words, showing her the land, the animals, the routines of a rancher's life. Slowly she began to smile, a small, tentative curve of her lips that spoke of relief and curiosity. For a moment, the hardships of her past seemed to fade, replaced by the simple joys of warmth, safety, and companionship. Yet despite the growing bond between them, danger still lurked outside. The rancher knew that soldiers or townspeople might come searching for her at any time. He also knew that if they discovered her hiding here, both of their lives could be at risk. He considered leaving the ranch, moving her to a safer location, but the woman refused to leave. She had been running for so long, and now she had found a place where she could rest, where someone cared for her. The rancher understood that protection was not just about walls or fences. It was about trust, care, and courage. Together, they were building a fragile sanctuary, one that could be shattered in an instant, yet one that was worth every risk. The days passed, each one blending into the next, filled with small moments of shared humanity. The woman learned to cook simple meals, to gather herbs for healing, and to care for the small garden the rancher had planted. The rancher, in turn, learned to understand her gestures, her expressions, and her quiet ways of communicating. They laughed softly at small mistakes, celebrated tiny successes, and comforted each other when memories of the past surfaced. Life on the ranch became a careful balance of safety, routine, and growing trust, a world both fragile and full of hope. One night, under a sky filled with stars, the rancher sat beside the woman near the fire. The prairie was silent, the only sounds the distant calls of animals and the crackle of the flames. He looked at her, her face illuminated by the dancing light, and realized that she had become more than a stranger or a guest. She had become someone whose presence mattered deeply to him. The bond they had formed was quiet, unspoken, but it was undeniable. She had found safety, and he had found a connection he had long thought lost forever. Even in the midst of this growing closeness, both understood the world outside their ranch was still dangerous. They spoke little of it, but the unspoken understanding hung in the air. Trust was precious, and the sanctuary they had created must be guarded with care. Yet despite the fear, both felt a new kind of courage. Together, they had begun to rewrite the rules of their lives. The woman was no longer just a survivor hiding from the world. She was learning to live again, to find strength in companionship, and to hope that not all people were cruel or indifferent. The rancher was no longer just a lonely man guarding his land. He had become a protector, a friend, and someone willing to risk everything for the safety of another. As dawn broke over the prairie, casting long shadows and golden light across the fields, the rancher and the woman prepared for another day. Their routines were small but meaningful, gathering water, feeding animals, tending the garden, and sharing moments of quiet conversation. Each day was a test of patience, trust, and courage. But with every passing hour, the bond between them grew stronger, subtle yet powerful, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of kindness. The world beyond the hills remained uncertain, filled with dangers neither could fully predict. Yet inside the ranch, a fragile peace had settled. Two lives, once marked by loss and fear, were beginning to intersect in ways that promised hope, safety, and a new understanding of what it meant to care for another human being. And so, in the quiet heart of the prairie, life continued, simple, challenging, yet filled with the quiet promise of trust, survival, and the beginning of something extraordinary. Days and weeks passed, and life at the ranch began to settle into a quiet rhythm. The prairie stretched endlessly beyond the fences, golden in the sunlight, and the distant hills seemed to promise safety and freedom. Yet, inside the small house, an invisible tension lingered. The Apache woman no longer hid, yet she remained cautious, her eyes constantly alert to movement or sound. The rancher, for his part, watched her closely, not out of suspicion, but out of concern. He had come to understand that the world outside their little sanctuary was still dangerous, and that her past could return at any moment to disrupt the fragile peace they had built. The woman began to share more of her story. Words came slowly, haltingly, mixed with gestures and drawings in the dirt by the fireplace. She spoke of her family, of the people she had loved and lost, and of the dangers that had chased her through forests and across rivers. The rancher listened in silence, trying to piece together her experiences. Each story she told carried the weight of survival: days without food, nights hiding from soldiers, and moments of sheer terror when she thought she might not live. Yet, even through the fear and pain, there was a resilience in her voice, a determination to keep moving forward despite everything. The rancher found himself admiring her strength. He had always known life was hard, but seeing someone endure so much and still find a way to survive changed his understanding of courage. It was not about bravado or force. It was about the quiet determination to keep going when every option seemed lost. The woman's story, though fragmented and incomplete, left a mark on him. He realized that he could no longer see the world in simple terms of us and them. People were more complicated than that, shaped by experiences and choices, by fear and hope alike. Each day, the woman helped around the ranch in small ways. She gathered water from the well, tended to the fire, and fed the animals. She learned to cook simple meals, to sew mended clothes, and even began planting small seeds in the garden. The rancher watched her carefully, offering guidance without intrusion. He understood that trust was fragile, built slowly and easily broken. Yet, each small act of cooperation and kindness strengthened the bond between them. He began to feel a deep sense of responsibility for her, knowing that his choices could affect not only her safety, but her ability to survive in a world that had been cruel to her. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, the woman paused and looked toward the distant hills. Her eyes were full of concern, and her hands trembled slightly. She pointed in the direction of the town beyond the prairie, then back at herself, and finally at the rancher. He understood immediately. She feared that someone might be looking for her. The thought made his chest tighten. He knew the townspeople often distrusted outsiders, and that soldiers sometimes patrolled the area in search of native people. The rancher had always prided himself on his ability to handle problems, but this was different. This was about another life, someone fragile yet strong, and he could not fail her. Over the next few days, the rancher became more vigilant. He checked the fences, reinforced the doors, and even hid supplies in safe places. He taught the woman how to move quietly around the house and the property, how to listen for danger, and how to hide if necessary. She learned quickly, absorbing every lesson with care and attention. Though the lessons were practical, they also became a source of connection between them. Each shared effort, each small success, strengthened the trust and understanding that had begun to form. Despite the precautions, the woman sometimes spoke of the fear that lingered in her heart. She told stories of nights spent alone in the forest, of running through darkness with only the stars for guidance. She described the cold, the hunger, and the constant feeling of being pursued. The rancher listened with patience, never interrupting, offering comfort with simple words and steady presence. He began to realize that protecting her was not just about keeping her physically safe. It was about helping her heal from the trauma she had endured. And in the process, he found himself learning to see the world through her eyes, to understand the fear and courage that had shaped her life. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the woman spoke more openly than she had before. She told him about the people she had once known, friends, family, neighbors, and how they had been torn apart by violence and fear. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but the weight of her words was heavy. She spoke of hope, too, fragile and delicate, like a flower struggling to bloom in the harsh prairie soil. The rancher felt a surge of emotion he had not experienced in years. He realized that he was no longer just a protector. He was a witness to her story, and that carried a responsibility he could not ignore. As trust grew, small moments of joy began to appear. The woman laughed quietly when she spilled water while watering the garden. She smiled when the rancher showed her how to saddle a horse. She marveled at the stars at night, pointing out constellations and telling him names of stars he had never heard before. These moments, though simple, were profound. They reminded the rancher that life could still hold beauty, even in a world filled with danger and loss. And for the woman, these moments were a glimpse of normalcy, a chance to experience safety, care, and companionship after so much fear and suffering. Yet even as they shared these small joys, the threat of the outside world never fully disappeared. Soldiers patrolled nearby, townspeople whispered rumors, and the memory of past violence hung over the woman like a shadow. The rancher knew that their sanctuary was fragile, that one misstep could expose them both to danger. He became more cautious, more deliberate in his actions, and more protective of the woman. At the same time, he realized that he could not shelter her forever. She needed to regain her strength, to find hope and resilience within herself, and to trust that the world could hold kindness as well as cruelty. The woman, in turn, began to understand the rancher in ways she had not anticipated. She saw his dedication, his quiet strength, and his willingness to risk everything for her safety. She noticed his careful attention to the land, the animals, and the routines that kept the ranch alive. And she began to trust him, not blindly, but with a careful, deliberate awareness that he was someone who could be relied upon. In this mutual understanding, a deep bond was forming, one built not on words alone, but on actions, shared experience, and the recognition of each other's humanity. One night, as a full moon rose over the prairie, the woman and the rancher sat outside near the barn. The air was cool and still, and the prairie seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The woman pointed toward the horizon, then back at herself, and finally at the rancher, as if asking a question without words. He understood immediately. She wanted to know if she could stay, if this place could truly be safe. He nodded slowly, meeting her gaze with steady eyes. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. Trust had been earned, and with it came a fragile hope, a belief that they could face the dangers of the world together, as allies, companions, and protectors of each other. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them grew stronger. They worked together on the ranch, shared stories and moments of quiet reflection, and learned to rely on each other. The woman no longer flinched at every sound, no longer hid from every shadow. She began to smile more openly, to move with confidence, and to embrace the small joys of life that she had once thought impossible. The rancher, too, changed. He became more patient, more empathetic, and more aware of the strength that comes not from solitude or fear, but from connection and care. Despite the hardships and dangers that still lay beyond the ranch, both understood that they had found something rare and valuable: trust, companionship, and a sense of shared purpose. The woman was no longer simply a survivor hiding from the world. She was learning to live again, to hope again, and to believe that kindness could exist even in a harsh and unforgiving world. The rancher, once a lonely man guarding his land, had become more than a protector. He had become a friend, a confidant, and someone willing to face the unknown for the sake of another. As the sun set each evening, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, they would sit together near the fire, sharing quiet moments of understanding. The world outside remained unpredictable, but inside their little sanctuary, life had found a rhythm. It was a rhythm filled with care, trust, and the beginnings of hope. And in that fragile balance, they discovered something extraordinary: the power of compassion, the strength of resilience, and the quiet truth that even in the darkest times, human connection can light a path forward. Life on the ranch had settled into a quiet rhythm, but the world outside was not as calm. The town nearby had begun to notice small changes in the rancher's behavior. Neighbors whispered among themselves when he traveled to the general store less often or when he avoided certain conversations. Some said he had become secretive. Others claimed he was hiding something. The rancher had always minded his own business, but these whispers carried weight in a small town where curiosity and suspicion traveled faster than the wind. The Apache woman had begun to explore the edges of the ranch more confidently, but she remained cautious. She watched the distant hills and listened for unusual sounds, a habit she had formed from long months of hiding. Even though the rancher tried to shield her from worry, she could sense the tension in the air. There was something in the way people looked at the ranch, a subtle unease that told her they were not fully welcome. She understood the world outside their sanctuary could be dangerous, and she reminded herself constantly to stay vigilant. One afternoon, the rancher was repairing a broken fence near the pasture when he noticed a group of men walking along the edge of the prairie, moving in a slow, deliberate line. They carried themselves with authority and confidence, and their eyes swept across the landscape as if searching for something or someone. The rancher's heart tightened. He had heard stories of soldiers and town patrols looking for Apache people, and he realized that these men could be connected to the dangers he had been guarding against. He quietly returned to the house, his mind racing with strategies to protect the woman without causing alarm or confrontation. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky turned soft shades of orange and pink, the rancher and the woman sat near the fireplace. He explained the situation in simple words, gesturing toward the windows and doors to emphasize caution. She listened carefully, her face tense but calm. Together, they made plans for how she could hide if anyone came to the ranch, where supplies could be kept in secret, and how they could avoid drawing attention. The bond between them had grown stronger, forged not only in care and trust, but now also in the shared responsibility of survival. Rumors in the town continued to spread. Some neighbors speculated that the rancher was hiding an outlaw. Others thought he had taken in someone in need. The truth was far more complicated, but the rancher knew that rumors could turn dangerous quickly. If anyone learned the woman's identity, both of their lives could be at risk. He became more cautious when he traveled to town, using errands as opportunities to watch for any signs of trouble. He avoided unnecessary conversations and kept his supplies hidden, all while maintaining the daily work of the ranch. The tension was subtle but constant, like a shadow moving silently over the prairie. One night, there was a knock at the door. The rancher froze, listening as the sound echoed through the small house. The woman hid in the back corner, her body tense and her eyes wide. The rancher approached the door carefully, peeking through the small window. Outside stood a group of men, townspeople who had begun asking questions about his routines, his travels, and the occasional visitors he had seen. They spoke politely enough, but the questions carried an edge of suspicion. The rancher greeted them calmly, offering answers that revealed nothing while keeping his voice steady. He understood that any wrong word could betray the woman and destroy the sanctuary they had built. After the men left, the rancher and the woman discussed what had happened. She realized that even the town itself could pose a threat, and that caution would be their constant companion. The rancher, for his part, became more aware of the fine line they were walking. One small mistake could bring ruin, yet they could not abandon the life they had begun to build together. They reinforced hiding spots, checked the fences again, and made a plan for emergencies. It was a delicate balance, requiring patience, intelligence, and courage from both of them. The rancher also began teaching the woman small skills to help her blend in if necessary. She learned how to gather herbs quietly, to move through the house without drawing attention, and to keep herself occupied without raising suspicion. Though these lessons were practical, they were also deeply symbolic. Each skill represented her growing independence and confidence, her ability to survive and thrive even in a world that had once been hostile. The rancher watched her carefully, pride and concern mixing in his chest. He knew that she had already endured so much, and he wanted to equip her with every advantage possible, even while knowing that danger could arrive without warning. As weeks passed, the threat from the town intensified subtly. A few neighbors lingered near the edges of the ranch, watching the rancher's movements. Strange noises were reported at night, likely caused by wildlife, but interpreted by some as signs of hidden visitors. The rancher remained calm and collected, never letting fear control his actions, but he was aware of the pressure building around them. Every day became a careful exercise in observation, caution, and strategy. The woman began to understand the ways of the outside world better than ever. She noticed small details, the way people avoided certain topics, the gestures that betrayed suspicion, the conversations that seemed polite but carried hidden meanings. She also learned the importance of patience. Danger did not always announce itself loudly. It often crept slowly, testing boundaries and waiting for mistakes. Her instincts, sharpened by years of survival, complemented the rancher's experience and wisdom. Together, they formed a quiet partnership, each aware of the other's strengths and weaknesses. One evening, as a cold wind swept across the prairie, the rancher decided it was time to test their preparations. He set up a small exercise. The woman would move quietly from one side of the house to the other while he observed from a hidden spot. She moved carefully, her steps precise and deliberate. He watched as she navigated obstacles, responded to imaginary threats, and maintained calm under pressure. When she reached the designated spot safely, he nodded in approval. The exercise was more than practice. It was a demonstration of trust, skill, and the ability to face danger without panic. Despite the growing precautions, the town's suspicion continued to simmer. A group of townspeople began asking more pointed questions about the rancher's movements, his supplies, and the occasional noises coming from the property. The rancher responded politely but firmly, never giving more than what was necessary. He knew that appearances mattered as much as actions, and he had to maintain a careful balance between transparency and secrecy. The woman observed silently, learning how to navigate human behavior in ways she had never needed to before. As the days passed, a sense of quiet resilience developed between them. The rancher and the woman had faced danger before, but now the threat was more subtle, more insidious. It was not a storm or a predator, but suspicion, curiosity, and the unpredictable behavior of others. Yet they remained calm, relying on their partnership and the routines they had established. Each day of safety, each night without intrusion, strengthened their bond and their confidence. They had learned to read the signs, anticipate danger, and respond with patience and intelligence. Then, one night, the rancher noticed unusual movement near the edge of the property. Shadows shifted, and faint voices whispered in the dark. He alerted the woman, and they both retreated to a hidden corner of the house. The voices drew closer, and it became clear that someone was attempting to approach the ranch under cover of darkness. The rancher's heart pounded, but he maintained his composure. Together, they waited silently, listening as the intruders passed near the property without discovering their hiding place. It was a tense reminder that danger could arrive at any time, and that their vigilance must never falter. The events of that night changed the way they viewed the world outside. The woman realized that her life was still at risk, even in the sanctuary of the ranch. The rancher understood that trust, while vital, was fragile and must be protected carefully. They reinforced their routines, established new hiding places, and doubled their precautions. Their bond, however, grew stronger. Shared danger had a way of deepening trust and connection, and both realized that they could rely on each other completely in moments of crisis. As the weeks turned into months, life on the ranch became a careful dance between safety and freedom. The woman gained confidence, learning to move through the house, the barn, and the fields without drawing attention. She learned to anticipate the movements of neighbors, the patterns of the town, and the subtle signs of approaching danger. The rancher, in turn, grew more patient, more observant, and more attuned to her needs. Together, they created a fragile equilibrium, one built on trust, intelligence, and mutual respect. Yet, the threat of discovery never fully disappeared. Rumors in the town continued to grow, and the potential for danger remained real. Each day required careful planning, thoughtful action, and unwavering courage. And through it all, the bond between the rancher and the woman deepened, not just as protector and protected, but as companions who had learned to rely on each other in a world that could be cruel and unforgiving. In the quiet moments, when the prairie was still and the sun painted the sky in shades of gold, they would sit together near the fire, reflecting on the day's challenges and small victories. The rancher often thought of how much had changed since the day he discovered the woman hiding in the closet. He had gained not only a companion but a new understanding of courage, resilience, and the power of trust. The woman, in turn, had begun to see a world beyond fear, a world where kindness existed, where safety could be found, and where human connection could provide strength even in the face of danger. The days grew longer and warmer as the seasons changed, and the prairie began to bloom with fresh grass and wildflowers. Life at the ranch had settled into a cautious rhythm, but one that carried a new kind of hope. The town's curiosity had slowed, and for now, the rancher and the Apache woman were left in peace. Yet, both knew that the outside world was never fully predictable. They had built a sanctuary together, but it was fragile, and it required constant attention. Still, for the first time in months, the woman felt she could breathe a little easier, and the rancher felt the weight of loneliness lifting from his shoulders. The woman had grown stronger, both in body and spirit. She moved around the ranch with confidence, tending the animals, working in the garden, and helping with repairs. She had learned the ways of the land, understanding the rhythms of the prairie, the habits of the animals, and the small details that made ranch life possible. Her hands were no longer trembling with fear but were steady, skilled, and capable. She had learned to trust the rancher completely, and that trust gave her courage she had not known she could have. One morning, the rancher awoke to find her standing at the edge of the garden, gazing toward the distant hills. The sunlight caught her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes. She had been thinking about the future, about what life could be if they were no longer hiding, if the world could accept them as they were. The rancher approached quietly, not wanting to startle her. She turned to him with a small, hopeful smile, and he realized that she was ready to step beyond the shadow of fear. Together, they began to plan for a life that was no longer defined by hiding or suspicion. They organized the ranch more efficiently, making repairs to fences, expanding the garden, and ensuring that the animals were healthy and well fed. The woman learned to handle tools she had never used before, and the rancher marveled at her ability to adapt so quickly. Every task they completed together strengthened their bond, and each success, no matter how small, became a symbol of their shared resilience. As the days went by, the rancher and the woman also began to reflect on the dangers they had faced. They spoke quietly about the soldiers, the townspeople, and the long periods of fear and uncertainty. These conversations were not easy. They required honesty, patience, and empathy. Yet, through these discussions, they came to understand that their shared experiences had created a bond deeper than simple friendship. It was a bond built on trust, mutual respect, and the knowledge that they had relied on each other to survive. One afternoon, while working in the fields, the rancher noticed a group of children from the town watching them from a distance. The woman froze at first, instinctively hiding behind him, but he encouraged her gently, explaining that not all people sought to harm them. With cautious steps, the woman approached the children, who greeted her with curiosity rather than suspicion. She smiled, realizing that the world could hold kindness and acceptance. This small encounter gave her hope that life beyond hiding was possible, that she could live openly without fear. The rancher felt a deep sense of pride. He had not only protected her, but had also helped her regain a sense of agency and confidence. He had learned alongside her, discovering patience, empathy, and the quiet joy that comes from helping another human being heal. They were no longer simply a protector and someone in need. They were companions, partners navigating the uncertainties of life together. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in soft hues of pink and orange, the rancher and the woman sat on the porch, watching the prairie stretch endlessly before them. The air was warm, and the gentle sounds of nature surrounded them. She leaned slightly toward him, and he felt the comfort of her presence. They had faced danger, fear, and uncertainty together, and now, in this quiet moment, they could simply exist side by side without worry. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer dominated their lives. As the seasons continued to change, the rancher made a decision that would mark a new beginning for both of them. He offered her a permanent place on the ranch, not as a guest or someone to hide, but as family, as someone who belonged. She accepted with gratitude and humility, understanding that this offer represented more than safety. It represented acceptance, trust, and a chance to live fully in the world. From that day forward, they worked together openly, planning for the future with hope and determination. The bond between them deepened further as they shared daily routines, joys, and challenges. They celebrated small victories, the first bloom of a flower in the garden, the birth of a calf, a successful repair of a fence, and found comfort in each other's company during the inevitable difficulties of ranch life. The woman's laughter became a common sound on the property, a sign that she had found peace and belonging. The rancher's heart, once heavy with loneliness, was now lightened by companionship, gratitude, and the quiet satisfaction of helping another person rebuild their life. News from the town gradually became less intrusive. The whispers of suspicion faded, replaced by cautious acceptance. The rancher's steady demeanor and the woman's growing presence made it clear that they were part of the community, not outsiders to be feared. Slowly, the world outside the ranch adjusted to their existence, and they could move through life without constant vigilance. Though the past could never be erased, its power over them diminished, replaced by the strength of trust, friendship, and shared purpose. The woman also began to reconnect with her cultural roots in small, meaningful ways. She taught the rancher about simple traditions, about the importance of the stars, the land, and the ways of her people. He listened with respect, learning lessons about resilience, respect for nature, and the quiet wisdom that comes from lived experience. These teachings enriched their lives, creating a deeper understanding between them and a richer sense of connection to the world around them. As time went on, they realized that the ranch was more than a place of safety. It was a home, a space where they could both grow, heal, and thrive. The prairie no longer felt lonely. It felt alive with possibility. They explored the land together, tending to the animals, planting crops, and walking along the hills where the sun painted golden light across the grass. Each day brought new opportunities, small joys, and quiet lessons about life, patience, and resilience. One evening, under a sky filled with stars, the rancher and the woman sat together near a small fire outside the house. The prairie was silent, save for the gentle whisper of the wind and the distant calls of animals. They spoke quietly about the past, acknowledging the hardships they had endured, and about the future, imagining a life filled with hope, safety, and shared purpose. There was a sense of completion in this moment, a recognition that their journey together had transformed them both, teaching lessons about courage, trust, and the enduring power of human kindness. The seasons continued to pass, each bringing its own challenges and rewards. Winter brought cold winds and snow, but they faced it together, prepared and resilient. Spring brought new growth and renewal, a reminder that life continues despite hardships. Summer and autumn followed with their own rhythms, each day a testament to the strength and resilience they had built together. Through every season, they remained steadfast, their bond growing deeper, their trust unshakable, and their hope for the future stronger than ever. In the quiet moments, the rancher often reflected on the day he had discovered her hiding in the closet. He remembered the fear, the uncertainty, and the weight of responsibility he had felt. He realized how far they had come since that moment, and he felt gratitude for the journey they had shared. The woman, too, thought of the long nights of fear and running, of loss and uncertainty. She realized that, for the first time in her life, she had a place to belong, someone who cared for her, and a life she could embrace without constant fear. Their story, once defined by fear and survival, had become a story of hope, trust, and human connection. The rancher and the woman had faced the dangers of the world together, navigated the uncertainties of life, and built something lasting. Their bond was not just about protection or survival. It was about understanding, compassion, and the quiet joy of shared humanity. They had discovered that even in a world filled with hardship, kindness could create sanctuary, courage could build bridges, and trust could transform lives. As the sun set on the prairie, casting long shadows and bathing the land in golden light, they stood side by side, looking out over the fields they had tended together. Life was not perfect, and the world remained unpredictable, but they had found peace. They had found each other, and in that discovery they had found something far greater than safety or shelter. They had found hope, belonging, and the quiet promise of a shared future.